Hey, what's up? It's John from Coding Addict, and welcome to Practical TypeScript course, where we'll focus on practical applications of TypeScript so you can start using it effectively in your projects right away. During the course, we'll cover everything from setting up your development environment to deploying your TypeScript applications. The course consists of three major parts. First part, TypeScript fundamentals, where we'll explore basic types, interfaces, classes, generics, and rest of the good stuff. Second part, React and TypeScript, where we'll integrate TypeScript into React projects, create typed components, and manage state with TypeScript. And the third part is where we'll put our TypeScript knowledge to good use and build a modern store application with TypeScript, Shatsy UI, and React Router. If you wish to explore all of the features of the store project, it's located at this URL, TypeScript comfy sloth.netlify.app. Again, the URL is TypeScript comfy sloth.netlify.app. A quick side note, this is the first part of the practical TypeScript course. If you're interested in enrolling in the full course, follow the link in the description or navigate to codingaddict.io. Again, the URL you're looking for is codingaddict.io. And once you get there, look for practical TypeScript course. Okay, and first let's recap that JavaScript is considered loosely or dynamically typed because variable types are determined at runtime and can change as the program executes. This means you don't have to declare the type of the variable when you create it. And variable can hold values of different types at different times. So the following code is a valid JavaScript code. However, where are we going to encounter an error if we try to run this code? Correct, at runtime. And this is manageable if you have few lines of code. But the bigger the project, the more challenging it will be to spot such technically innocent bugs. And this is where TypeScript enters the picture, because it is a programming language that builds on JavaScript by adding static typing. This means you can specify things like types of variables, function parameters, return values, and some other things to help catch errors early and improve the code quality. It is a superset of JavaScript. So yes, all of the JavaScript code is also a valid TypeScript code. Now, one way to think about it is as follows. By using TypeScript in our project, we'll still write the JavaScript we already know, but with some elements or sprinkles of TypeScript. And these elements will act as safeguards or constraints to help us catch potential errors more quickly and without the need for 10,000 console logs. When we introduce TypeScript to our project, we will write our app in the .ts, or in the case of React, in the .tsx file. There will be a compile or transpile step where all of the TypeScript code is transpiled to good old JavaScript code. And at the end, since it is a vanilla JavaScript code, we can run it anywhere. Quite often, you'll hear people say something along the lines of, well, once I built my first project with TypeScript, it was very hard to go back and build with just vanilla JS. And even though I was also very skeptical of such statements, I can verify that it was the same in my case. Yes, TypeScript still has learning curve, and yes, it involves more work. But at the same time, you'll notice how you're able to fix a bunch of the errors quickly at build time without running around like a headless chicken. Before we set up a brand new TypeScript project, I want to mention a few useful things. If you're confused about some topic or simply want to research a concept in more detail, a good place to start is TypeScript docs, which are located at typescriptlang.org. Again, the URL is typescriptlang.org. Also in there, under the Playground tab, you will find a nifty code sandbox or TypeScript Playground, which I might utilize from time to time during the course to underscore some particular point. It works as follows. On the left side, we write a valid TypeScript code and we get back the resulting JavaScript code. Now, you won't be able to build the entire project in there, but it is a very cool option if you quickly want to test something. As far as the code editor, I'm going to use VS Code. And since it's practically an industry standard these days, my assumption is that you'll use the same one. Since I record courses, I use the very basic default theme. And when it comes to my extensions, I will mention some useful ones once there's a need during the course. In order to work with TypeScript, you will need Node installed on your machine. Again, something I assume you already have done. But if it's not the case, please visit nodejs.org. Again, the URL is nodejs.org. Pick your operating system and follow the install steps. Also, during the course, I'm going to reference the main course repo, where you'll find source code, challenges, notes, useful references, and tons of other useful stuff. So I highly suggest getting a hold of the repo before you continue with the videos. Just look for my GitHub profile, and under the repos, search for TypeScript course repository. There are a few ways how we can add TypeScript to our project. Since it's available as an NPM package, we can install it globally or on the per project basis, set up the configuration, and run the compile step manually. This is definitely an option, but we're going to take a different approach, which is going to be pre-built template. Because at this point, at least in my opinion, it's a more realistic scenario. Chances are, whether you want to build a Next.js or Remix or a good old React app, there will be already a template that contains the technology you want to use, as well as TypeScript configuration. So more often than not, your job will be to write a valid code instead of losing your sleep over correct configuration setup. For this course, I picked Vite since it's one of the most popular build tools out there, but please keep in mind, as far as the TypeScript logic is concerned, it's the same if, for example, you're going to use Next.js with a TypeScript template. Now, we want to run one command in order to set up our template, and I'll show you two places where you can get the command. First option, you can navigate to Vite docs, which are located at vitejs.dev. Then click on getting started. And pretty much you're looking for this command, and then we just need to pick the template. And since my NPM version is bigger than 7, I'm going to run my command with the double dash. Now, as you can see, we have tons of templates available. And the idea is following. We go with npm create Vite latest, then the project name, then double dash, go with the template one, and pick the template. As you can see, we can go with React.js as a side note, something we're going to use in the part 2 and 3. We can also, for example, set up the view with TypeScript. And we're actually going to start the course with vanilla TypeScript template. So this is just going to be an application built with vanilla JavaScript. We're not going to use React. And to tell you honestly, we don't really care about the template. We just want to use it in order to learn TypeScript. So pretty much most of the first part of the course we'll spend in one file. And you'll see what I'm talking about in a second. Now, remember in the previous video, I mentioned the main course repo. Navigate over here and then look for TypeScript tutorial. And under this directory, look for README. And here you'll right away get the command. And as I said, this is something that I'm going to copy in literally a few minutes. And I suggest actually doing the same, because in here, again, you'll find all of the notes and challenges and all that cool stuff. So if you want to save yourself time on typing, just navigate over here and grab the command again, npm create vite at latest. Then, at least in my case, the project name is going to be TypeScript, then double dashes, then template, and we're going to go with vanilla TS. So let me grab the command. Let me navigate, I guess, to desktop, and I'm going to zoom in. Then let me set up my command. And once I have successfully installed the project on my machine, I want to open up my text editor, drag and drop the folder, and up next, we'll take a look at the files and folders available in this template. As far as the files and folders, we've got over here a public one. So this is where we can place the public assets. Then we have a source one. Essentially, this is where we'll do all of our work. A git ignore, where we specify which files are going to be ignored by the source control. Then index HTML, which is actually going to be our homepage. Also a package JSON, something we're going to cover in more detail in a few minutes. And also a TS config, which we'll cover in greater detail later on in the course. And before we take a look at the specific files and cover the build step, here are a few things I want to do first. Since it's a Node application, we do want to install the dependencies. So effectively just open up the integrated terminal and run npm install. Now, also, again, I highly suggest getting the README, since in my opinion, you will find it super useful as you're following along. So just navigate back to the project and somewhere create a README markdown one and just paste the contents over here. Save it. And once we install dependencies, now we also get the Node modules. So this is where all of our dependencies are located. Then we want to go with npm run dev, which is going to spin up our project in local development. And we're looking for localhost 5173. And this is what we should see on the screen. So essentially, there's some images over here, a text, as well as the counter. Now, if I'm being perfectly honest, like I mentioned previously, we really don't care about the actual vanilla JS application. I believe towards the end of the first part of the course, yes, we will build a tiny app, but most of our time we'll spend over here in the source one in one specific file called tutorial TS, where effectively we will just learn all the TypeScript fundamentals. Now, if we take a look at the package JSON, we see that we have the dev one. This is the command we just invoked. And also there's a build one. Now, before we run build, I do want to create a file and showcase how our setup is going to look like. Now, one interesting thing that I do want to point out, notice how before the build command, they actually invoke TS and C. So notice how TypeScript is a dev dependency. So before the project is built, first it's compiled. So that's the step I mentioned previously, where we're going to write all of our code in the files with TS extension. And once we perform the build step, it's going to spit out the vanilla JavaScript code. So if we take a look at the index HTML, like I said, this will be our homepage. So for example, if you want to change the title, it's definitely an option. Then they have over here this div with an ID of app. And effectively in a second, you'll see how in the main TS, they inject the images, the divs, and all that into this app one. So now let's navigate to the main TS. In here, they import the styles. Again, something we're not really concerned with. Also two images, the TypeScript one and Vite one, and also a counter. And then they select div with an ID of app. And like I said, they dynamically inject the elements into the DOM. As you can see, there are some already sprinkles of TypeScript, and essentially this is something that we're gonna cover during the first part of the course. But most of the logic should look very familiar, correct? Because this is straight up JavaScript, again, with just sprinkles of TypeScript. Now, if we take a look at the counter, it's going to be same idea. This is straight up JavaScript with the only difference that now we're looking for element. And actually, we specifically say that the type is going to be HTML button element. Now, how is our setup going to look like? Since I said that, I mean, we really don't care about this code. And to tell you honestly, we're not actually going to look too much in the browser either. Most of the time we'll spend in the editor. Well, in here, in the source, I want to create a new file. In my case, I'm going to call this tutorial TS. The name is totally up to you. Just make sure that you add the TS extension. So we're going to go over here with tutorial, then TS, we create a new file. And for now, I just want to log, just so I can see that everything works. And I'm going to go with TypeScript and then tutorial. Let me save it. And then in order for this code to run, we just want to navigate to main TS and we just want to import the file. That's it. We're not going to do anything else. We'll simply go with import. And now we're just looking for our TS file. So tutorial and TS. And the moment we do that, once we navigate to the browser, if everything is correct, we should see that console log. And if that's the case, we're in good shape. And before we move on to TypeScript fundamentals, let me show you the result of the build step. Again, let's just recall that before Vite, our build tool, builds the production ready application, it's actually going to compile our code, which essentially just means that all of the TypeScript elements we're going to have in our code are going to be transpiled to good old vanilla JavaScript. And essentially during this video, I just want to showcase that. So don't worry about the code I'm going to write. In fact, you don't have to follow along. I just want to showcase the end result. So let's say if we're going to add something TypeScripty, for example, interface, of course, something we're going to cover during the first part of the course. And I'm going to go with name string and ID number. And as a side note, essentially it's just a shape of an object. And then I'm going to create the object and I'm going to go with some value. So I'll add the type over here. And now I just need to provide name, which has to be a string now. So I'm just going to go to random and comma. And then we're going to go with ID and then 1, 2, 3. And then let's also log. So let's go with some object. So once we navigate right now to a terminal, we have a few options. If you want, you can always stop the dev server. And essentially you do that with Control-C, or you can just open up a new terminal window. And that is going to be my approach. So essentially now I want to go with npm and not dev, but we're actually looking for build. So we run this command. If we don't have any TypeScript errors, we're going to be successful. And now notice we have this dist folder. So this is our production ready application. We still have index.html. Okay. Everything is beautiful. And then in the assets, we'll have the index.js. So this is essentially our application in vanilla.js. And if we take a look at our code, so notice I have this console log TypeScript tutorial. So I clearly know that it's coming from our file. Notice there is no interface anymore. Again, there is some kind of minified object over here. And effectively, we also console log it. That's it. So there is no interface. There is no type string or type number, or in fact, any of the other stuff that we have here as far as the TypeScript elements. So again, essentially we'll write all of our logic in the files with TS or TSX extension if we're working with React. And then once we build our project, we're going to get back our good old vanilla JavaScript code, which essentially we can run anywhere. So hopefully it's clear what's happening during the build process. So now let me clean up our project. First, I want to remove the dist folder. Then also I'm going to remove my second terminal window. And at the very end, I just want to remove this code from tutorial. Yes. So this is going to be our starting point, where essentially we have console log in tutorial. Yes. And if we take a look at the browser, we should see over here TypeScript tutorial. And if you have the same result, now we can move on to the next task. Okay. And let's start our TypeScript journey by discussing type annotations, which allow us to specify the variable type. So let's say in my project, I have a variable by the name of awesome name. And if you have watched any of my courses and tutorials, you know that the most awesome name ever is shake and bake. Since I'm working in a TypeScript project, I can actually explicitly set up the type. And the syntax is following. We go with colon, and then since I want this to be a string, I type string. Now there are quite a few types, and I'm not going to list all of them. I really find it pointless. Essentially, the most straightforward ones are string, number, and Boolean. And again, the syntax is going to be the same. So we just go over here with the colon and then the type. And of course, as we're working through the course, we'll get to know the other types as well. And the moment I set this type for my variable, I get two things out of the box. Essentially, it can never be something else. So I cannot go to the next line and set it equal to a function. And also, I'll right away get the methods that are associated with this type. So in this case, it's going to be a string. So just to demonstrate that, if I go to the next line, and if I set it equal to a value of something, this is still valid. Why? Well, because type is string, so everything's correct. Also, I can go to next line and set it equal to awesome dot, and notice right away I get only the methods that are associated with the type string, which again is super awesome because essentially I avoid some unnecessary bugs. So in this case, I'm just going to go to uppercase. And now if I log this value, if I go with awesome name and take a look at my console, if everything is correct, it should be equal to a something. So we set it equal to different string value, and then we ran the to uppercase method. Now, one thing we cannot do is something like this, where I go with awesome name and set it equal to 20, which is a different type. So notice immediately TypeScript starts yelling at me. Type number is not assignable to a type string. And I want to repeat the same thing for the number as well as the Boolean. So just so it's clear, we're going to start with some kind of variable. In my case, I'm going to go with amount. I'll set it equal to a number. And again, I can do anything that's allowed with the numbers. For example, I can set equal amount 12 minus 1, something like that. But I cannot set amount equal to pence. That's not going to work right away. TypeScript is going to be super helpful. It's going to say, hey, listen, you said this is going to be the number. So yeah, you can run the number methods. You can do calculations, but you cannot just reassign it to something else. And lastly, let's take a look at the Boolean. Pretty much same deal. We're going to go with is awesome. We're going to add a colon, set up a Boolean type. For start, it's going to be true. Then we're going to set is awesome equal to false. And then let's try to set it equal to shake and bake. Again, the most awesome name ever. So we're going to go with is awesome. And let's go with shake and bake. Again, cannot do it because the type is Boolean. And essentially in the process, we're just avoiding this entire debacle where initially it can be one value, then 3 lines later, it's something else. And then we're turning into a third thing and then start running some methods on it. Essentially, this is static. So now we say, hey, listen, this is going to be string and string only. Same goes for number, Boolean. And in the process, we just avoid a bunch of unnecessary bugs that come from typos, that come from just using wrong methods, and that sort of thing. And before we work on our first challenge, let me quickly mention something. TypeScript is actually really smart and can infer the type of the variable based on the values when it's defined. Now, the fancy name is type inference, but essentially for us, it just means that we can remove all of these type annotations and we'll still get all of the goodies that I covered in a previous video. So now if I hover over the awesome name, notice how based on the value when the variable was defined, TypeScript can nicely infer the type. So in this case, it's string, then it's the amount, and then when it comes to is awesome, TypeScript knows that it's a Boolean. Now, don't dismiss the type annotations. We're still going to use them, but most likely not for such straightforward variables. Type inference also has some gotchas, especially when we start working with more complex values. So yes, TypeScript is always going to try to help you when it comes to functions, when it comes to variables. It will try to kind of get the type based on the value. And obviously it's super awesome because it saves us time. Notice I don't have to go to every variable and just make sure that the type is set. But there are some gotchas we need to be aware of, and don't dismiss type annotations because we're still going to use them throughout the course. Just not for variables like this. Okay, and now it's time for our challenge. And since it's our first one, I will cover the steps as well. But with the future challenges, just so we can save a little bit of time, I will most likely right away start working on the solution. Also, since it's our first one, it's going to be extremely straightforward. I just wanted to get the ball rolling, just so we get used to this idea that we learn some stuff and then we work on some kind of challenge. So I want you to create a variable of type string and try to invoke a string method on it. Then the same is going to be with a number, create a variable and try to perform a math operation. Also, I want you to create the Boolean one and perform the logical operation. And then try to just assign some values to those variables that are different types. So just try to come up with something that shouldn't supposed to work and see whether TypeScript complains about it. Now, you can use the type annotation, or you can also use the type inference. That's totally up to you. Again, super straightforward challenge where I just want to navigate the tutorial. I want to come up with some kind of variable for my string. In my case, I will use the type annotation. Don't ask me why. Just think that it's going to be better in this case. So I'm going to go with hello and then let's go with TypeScript. Okay, beautiful. Then let's run the two uppercase. So greeting is equal to greeting dot, and then two uppercase. Let's invoke this. This should work. We should have no issues. And as long as I don't have the red squiggly lines, I'm good to go. So TypeScript is not yelling at me. Then also let me set up the age. So in this case, it's going to be a number. I'm going to set it equal to 25. Then let me add a 5 to it. Okay, also works. Everything is beautiful. And then we want to go with is adult. So that's my Boolean. Let's add a type annotation here. Age is, let's say, bigger or equal to 18. Now this should be true. And you know what? This is the case where I will log it. So let's see, is adult is true? Yep, that's the one. So now let me just set it equal to the opposite. I'm going to go with is adult is equal to opposite is adult. Again, let's log it, and now it's going to be false. And then somewhere here, let me just try to set the greeting equal to 10. That shouldn't work. Also, we can go with age and set it equal to 30. So string, again, we're going to get the error. And lastly, we have the is adult, and I'm just going to set it equal to yes. And as you can see, all of them result in errors. So again, we have one type, and TypeScript is not happy when we just randomly decide that our variable is going to be of different type. All right, and before we continue with tutorial, let me show you something interesting about the setup. You see, even though we have these TypeScript errors over here, we're going to be able to run our project locally. So what am I talking about? Well, if I go here and set up the console and log, and in my case, I'm just going to look for all three values. So reading, age, and is adult. If we navigate to a console, you can see, first of all, that all of the variables have the values that they're not supposed to. So TypeScript is complaining, but it still works. And also notice how our project didn't crash. We're just getting these TypeScript errors, correct? So here's the deal. When we're working with TypeScript, actually, project is going to work even with the errors locally. But whenever we want to host the project, what do we need to do? Well, we need to build it. That's usually the setup. And in order to build it, we'll have to pass the TypeScript checks. So if we try to build with TypeScript errors, we're going to fail. And as a result, we won't be able to host the project. Let me show you the package.json. Notice over here. So we have dev command, which essentially just spins up the dev server. And we also have the build command. And remember, before we even run feat build, we actually compile this with TypeScript. And again, if we have some errors, we won't get the, I believe it was this folder, where we have the static assets, which in turn are going to be used to host our project. So let me showcase that just so we are on the same page. First, I want to stop the dev server. Let me run npm run build. So at the moment, I have the errors, TypeScript errors, and immediately I just get back these error messages in my console. So in order to fix it, what do we need to do? Well, in this case, it's sort of simple where I can just comment them out, delete them, whatever. Doesn't really matter. Again, let me clear everything here. Let me run the last one, npm run build. And now, since I don't have any TypeScript errors, notice I have this folder. And this is where I have my production ready application. So again, locally, even with TypeScript errors, you'll be able to run the project. However, you'll have some issues once it's time to deploy it, once it's time to build the production ready application. And up next, let me introduce you to a union type, which allows a variable to hold a value of multiple distinct types. For now, we're just going to take a look at some basic examples, but since union types are super powerful, it's not the only time you'll see them in the course. So once we start working with functions, arrays, and all that, yep, we're going to use the union type as well. So let's imagine I have a variable by the name of tax, and typically it's a number, correct? So I can set it equal to 10. TypeScript can nicely infer the type, and I'm good to go. But let's imagine that whether I'm getting it from the API or whether user provides that value, it can also be a string. I can go here, set up my colon, then go with number. So it will definitely be a number. And I can use this pipe operator. And then I can just add another type, which in my case is going to be string. Now, please keep in mind, you can add 10 another types. But I mean, in our case, we're just going to stick with 2. But yeah, you can go here and add, for example, Boolean. It's definitely an option. So now I can go to a next line and I can set it equal to 100, and TypeScript is not going to complain because yeah, one of the types is actually number. Now I can also go here and set it equal to a string. And in my case, I'm going to go with, let's go with $10 over here. So both of them are valid because now I have union type where it can be either a number or a string. Now, once we start working with more complex examples, yes, we'll have to do some checks and all that. So all of that is coming up, but this is a super powerful concept where essentially we can say to TypeScript, hey, this is going to be either this or it's going to be the another type. Now, also something that I was blown away is the fact that we can set up the literal value type. So that's the fancy name. Essentially, it just means that I can provide the literal values. Let's imagine we have a request status. So that's my variable. Now, what are the typical values for the request status? Well, quite often it's pending, success, and error. So for starters, I can just go here with pending. So that will be my initial value. Then go with a colon. And now I can just provide the potential string values, which are going to be pending. Then again, I use the pipe operator. I provide success, then another pipe, and I'm going to go with error. And what's super, super cool is the fact that whenever I work with this request status, notice I right away get these suggestions. So it can either be error, pending, or success. And again, it helps me to avoid errors because it's way harder to mistype something. And also, I kind of just go here and say random. I mean, first of all, it doesn't match my suggestions. And second, right away, TypeScript is going to complain. So I don't have to find out about this bug in the runtime. I actually can see it right away as I'm building the project. So let me go here with success. Error is going to work. So there's nothing wrong with that. But if I'll try to set it equal to random, as you just saw, I mean, TypeScript is not going to be happy about it. Topic we're going to come back to when we set up more complex examples. And again, union types allow us to set up multiple types for the same variable. And while we're still on a roll, let's also cover type any, which allows us to opt out of the type checking. So I'm going to create a variable and I'm going to name it not sure. So not sure. Now I will set it equal to 4. And since we already covered that TypeScript can infer the type, we'll see over here this number. But I can also go with colon and set up any over here. Now any means exactly what the name implies. This can be anything. I can set it up equal to function, string, boolean, whatever. So in the next line, I can say, you know what, not sure is actually going to be a string, maybe a string instead. Then on the next line, I can set it equal to false. And as you can see, TypeScript is not complaining. Now, as you're looking at it, probably the first thought is, well, wait a minute, that's how variables behave in JavaScript. And you're absolutely correct. Now, as with everything in programming, there's a bunch of fights over it, whether you should use any at all. As far as my 2 cents, be very careful when you introduce any to your application because it can spread like wildfire. So you started off with setting up one variable, type any, and then next thing you know, you have any all over your application because, for example, when you return any from the function, then the result is any, and on and on and on and on. So definitely have a good reason why you want to use any. And as I note, any is something you'll see quite often when TypeScript is trying to come up with a type, but we haven't provided any clues. For example, if I'm just going to go with some random and I'm not going to set up the value, as you hover over it, notice now this is going to be type any. So this is something we quite often get by default when TypeScript is trying to get the type, but I mean, I haven't provided any clues what this value is going to be. And this is essentially something that we'll constantly try to fix, where, for example, for functions, implicitly it starts with any, but we don't want it to be any. We want it to be some kind of type. So just be careful when you use it. It's definitely an option. It's useful if, let's say, you want to test something. It's also useful if you have a pretty big code base and you just slowly want to introduce TypeScript. So you still want to run the project, but you slowly want to add it to your project. Yeah, it's definitely the case. Just, again, be very mindful when you set something any, because next thing you know it, half of the application is going to be any. And then at that point, I mean, it kind of loses the sense to use the TypeScript in the first place. Again, those are just my 2 cents. If you go to Google, you'll find definitely way stronger opinions, but let's just leave it at that and let's move on to the next topic. And next, let's see a practical application of type annotation, where essentially I have a list of books. So I just have some strings over here. And I also have a variable, which at the moment is undefined and there's no type, since, again, I want to showcase what type is going to be set by default. And I want to set up a loop where I iterate over, and then if it matches one of these titles over here, then I'll set the variable found book equal to that title. So first, let's set up the loop. I'm going to go with for off loop. So let book of books. Then we're going to set up the condition. So if book, and I think I'm going to go with the first string over here. So I'm going to go with 1984. If that's the case, then found book is going to be equal to a book. And we're also going to break out. So let's add the break keyword. Let's save it. If everything is correct, this should be equal to a title. So we can nicely go with log and then found book. Let's take a look at the console. Yep, we are good to go. Now, everything's awesome, but let's take a look at the type we have over here. By default, it's actually set to any, which leads to problems because anywhere, whether that is in the loop or over here, I can do something like this. I can set it actually equal to 10. So TypeScript is not stopping me. This is the behavior which I don't want, because I actually want this to be a string. Otherwise, yeah, in here it's going to be a string if I'm successful inside of this loop. But then eventually it might turn into a function. Again, good old JavaScript variable behavior, but I don't want this. I want this to be a TypeScript project where I explicitly know what is the type. So what's the solution? Well, we can navigate back over here and we can set it equal to a string. But now we have another problem. So let me remove these console logs. How do we know that for sure it's going to be a string? Because keep in mind, this runs when? At runtime. So if, let's say, I set it equal to 1983, well, this found book is not going to be equal to a book. What is it going to be equal to? Well, remember, by default, variables are what? Undefined. So if you'll try to set up some kind of logic over here, assuming that it's a string, TypeScript is going to yell at you. It's going to say, hey, listen, you are using it before there's even any kind of value, because again, TypeScript is not going to check whether at runtime this will be equal to a book. So yeah, we can set up the logic over here where I can say, if for sure the found book is equal to a book, TypeScript knows that actually these are strings, so we can run the method on it. For example, again, let's go with length. So this is going to work, but we cannot do it outside of the loop, because in here, there's no guarantee that actually this will be a string. So we need to set up the union type, where I'm going to go with, okay, it potentially could be a string, but by default, actually, it is undefined. So it's another type that we can use. So now by default, it's going to be undefined. If we're successful it's going to be equal to a string. And what's super, super, super awesome is the fact that TypeScript is going to be extremely helpful. Where if you try to, again, go with the good old length, notice how it will immediately add this optional chaining. Why? Well, because it can be undefined, and we can see that if we take a look at the error message. If you just add a dot, notice found book possibly can be undefined, and therefore TypeScript is going to add that optional chaining. So now we only run this length if it's actually equal to a string, if we have some kind of value. So if we won't be able to find a book, which is the current case, then this actually won't trigger the runtime error. Now, if we're successful, then we'll be able to nicely see the length of the book. You know what? I will change this one around. I'm just going to go here to found book and set it equal to uppercase. Let me do it this way. So we're going for uppercase. Let's invoke that. And then this one, I'll just log it. Again, it really depends whether we're able to find the book or no. So now let me move this found book, set it up here in my console, and let's see what is going to be the result. So I'm going to navigate over here. If everything is correct, I'm going to get my 4. If I'm not successful, then essentially it's just going to be undefined. But I won't have that runtime error where I'm trying to access the property on undefined. Hopefully that is clear. Okay, and before we move on to the next topic, let's work on a small union type challenge where first we want to create the order status, and in there we'll set up the literal types, and also we want to set up the discount, which can be a number or string type. And you know what? Just because I like to break the rules, I'm going to start with the second one. Doesn't really matter. I'm going to go with number or string. By default, I'll set it equal to 20 or any other number value. And I also want to test it whether I can set it equal to 20%. Now this works, but if I'll try to set up discount equal to true, essentially a boolean, TypeScript will yell at me, which is exactly what we expected. And also let's set up that order status. So order status variable by default is going to be equal to processing, but we want to set up those literal types. So this variable can be only one of these values. So we're going to start with processing, then we'll set up our pipe, and we're going to go with shipped. And also we want to add delivered over here. So now we can go to the next line, set it equal to one of these ones, and everything is going to work. But if I'll try to set it equal to canceled, again, TypeScript will yell at me. So let me just set this one up quickly, where if we go with order status, I just decide that I'm going to pass this value over here. I'm not going to be successful since I can see this red squiggly line. Let me comment this one out. We're done with the challenge. And up next, we're going to discuss arrays in TypeScript. And as far as the arrays in TypeScript, the general idea is following. Let's say I have prices array, and it's all numbers. So we're going to go over here with 100, 75, and then 42. If I want to set up the type, which is something I want to do, again, same deal. We go with colon, then we go with type, in this case, number, and then we set up the square brackets. So now I'm essentially telling TypeScript that this array will only have numbers. So if I add a number 34, everything is fine. If I'll try to stick hello, I'm going to get the error because this one is type string. And I explicitly told TypeScript that this is actually going to be an array of numbers. And the same is going to work if I will try to invoke push. So if I'll try to add the item, number is fine, string will cause the error. So let me comment this one out. The same works with string array. Let's say we have fruit, and this is going to be equal to apple and orange. we want to set up the type over here. In this case, it's going to be a string, and the same rules apply. If we'll try to add the item that doesn't match the type, we'll get the red squiggly line. Now be careful with the empty square brackets. So if we go here and just come up with random values and set it equal to empty square brackets. So if we won't provide the type over here, TypeScript just assumes that this will always be an empty array. So if I set it equal to my array and start adding items, TypeScript will immediately complain. And notice as we hover, it says, well, type string is not assignable to an empty array. So be careful with this one. I know it's tempting. Also be careful when you don't explicitly set up the type. So if I were to create an empty values array, TypeScript will get the type, but check it out. Now the type is any. So just like before, we'll run into those issues because now we can change these values any way we want. So we can take the string, then it turns into a number, and same deal. So be careful. Yes, TypeScript will infer the type, but most likely you don't want to set it equal to any. So this is the case where we want to create the empty array, but we explicitly want to say, yeah, this is going to be type number or string or Boolean or whatever. Now, also, while we're still on a subject of TypeScript inferring the type, let's take a look at this example. Let's say I have the names array and I add over here Peter and Susan. So if we hover over the names, everything is correct. TypeScript sees that we have over here a list of strings, and it correctly says the type for this array is string. But here's the gotcha. Since TypeScript is inferring those values based on what we have over here in the array, it doesn't stop me from doing this. And now if we hover over it, we can see that actually we have this union type. Like I said, we'll be coming back to this topic. And now we have string or number. So essentially now I can add numbers as well. Therefore, be careful when you're relying 100% on TypeScript to set the type. It's not going to stop you from adding different values to the particular array. And in that case, well, the type also is going to change. Now we can explicitly set up the array to be one or the other type. So I can go with array, for example, and I can say that, you know what, this array is going to have either a string or a Boolean. Again, we still set up the square brackets over here, and we set it equal to an array where we set up those two values. So we can go with apple, then true, which is a Boolean, then the same deal, orange, and let's set the false one over here. And with this in place, we can start working on our next challenge. Okay, and once we're familiar with arrays, now let's work on a tiny challenge where we want to set up the temperatures array, which will be type number, and colors, which is going to be type string, and then we also want to set up the mixed array. So let's start with temperatures, essentially our array of numbers. Now this one probably going to be the hardest as far as the spelling. Yep, notice over here. Let me fix that one. Okay, good. That took a while. Then I want to set up my type number, and we're gonna set up 20, then 25, and then 30. And let's try to push, I don't know, a string of hot. So let's access, then go with push, and let's try to pass in a string, and we won't be successful. So we can nicely comment this one out. After that, we have colors one. So this will be actually type of string. And in here, we're going to go with red, green, and blue. Let's save it, and let's try to add a Boolean. Why not? So colors here, dot, then push, and we're looking for a Boolean value, which is not allowed. And then let's set up the mixed one. So we're going to go with the variable. In this case, I'm going to call this mixed array. And this one will be either a number or a string. So number pipe, and we set up a string. So let's set it equal to our array. And in here, you know what? Just to make it interesting, why don't we try to add true? So Boolean. And notice right away, I'll have my error. So let's go with 1, then 2, and then we want to add 3. And with this in place, we can move on to the next topic.